and welcome to this 6G World webinar, where we'll be talking about what it will take to unify fixed, mobile and Wi-Fi access. My name's Alex Lawrence. I'm the managing editor at 6G World, and I'll be talking you through this today with with two excellent speakers. Now, I mean, the unification of different access types is not a new question. One of the first topics I encountered as a newcomer into telecoms back in 2004 was fixed mobile convergence, and that wasn't even new then. Now, at that time, the focus was really on delivering services in a unified manner across what were two very different network architectures. And, you know, arguably that was a bit of a kludge to make things work, but it's a far cry from a truly unified service, really just papering over the differences between those access types. So the question is, can we do better today? And if we can, why? Happily, we've got two leading lights to explore not just what's going on today and movements towards this, but the significance of the moves that are being made, the impact and the timelines that we're looking at. Now, since 2019, the Wireless Broadband Alliance, the WBA, has been advocating and developing 5G and Wi-Fi RAN convergence and building up open roaming standards for Wi-Fi as well. And I'm very pleased to welcome the WBA's CEO, Thiago Rodrigues. Meanwhile, the ONF has been working for over a decade to create open and interoperable software-based networks. And I'm really pleased to have the ONF's Managing Director, Timon Sloan, with us today. And so this webinar is going to be essentially a conversation with Thiago and Timon. So please do add in your questions and comments in the box provided. Those will come through to me, and I'll do my best to weave them into the conversation as we go, as well as taking some time at the end specifically for questions. So, as with all 6G World webinars, you should be able to find a recording of this, along with the other webinars, videos, and custom research on the 6G World website under our resources tab. This video should be up there early next week. So, I think that's enough of a preamble. Let's dive into this. Timon, would you mind introducing yourself and sharing a few observations just to get us started?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thanks, Alex. So, Timon Sloan. I run the Open Networking Foundation, and for those of you who don't know, ONF has been around for more than a decade now. It's really a sort of a collaboration that spun out of Stanford and Berkeley and the whole SDN movement that was, seated in those universities, but then really fostered and grown through the ONF. And SDN was all about, how do we, drive, disaggregate the network, so break it into pieces and make it possible to innovate again in the network. Because if, for those of you who recall, the network had become sort of these large, consolidated, vertically integrated systems, these huge refrigerators you'd buy from somebody like Cisco when you were building your IP backbone. And there was a view and a hope that the network could be broken into pieces with a controller and a separate data plane, and that would then open up the possibility of innovation. In some ways, an abstract concept at the time, and ONF started by championing that, doing some open source software around demonstrating what was possible there, and has again and again sort of run up against industry naysayers and say, oh, that's not going to work, or you can never scale, or that's you're just people wouldn't believe. And so ONF again and again sort of improved and knocked down the next domino in this effect of building larger and larger systems, starting with sort of a small demonstration of Ethernet-based systems. And it's grown over time now to have complete mobile solutions. We have a complete 5G mobile solution, RAN to core, and a version of that optimized for private 5G, components of that used in public networks. We have public networks that are running PON broadband worldwide with tier 1 operators, like Deutsche Telekom and others. So it's really pretty remarkable, the journey that ONF has been on. Started with this notion of breaking things and disaggregating, building open source components, and then putting together solutions, and those solutions have grown more and more powerful over time.
Excellent. Thanks, Timon. And I think there's quite a few points there that we can pick up on. But before we get into those, I'd just like to turn to Thiago to give us a sense of what the WBA is doing and the progress that you've seen.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. So my name is Thiago Rodrigues. I'm the CEO of the Wireless Broadband Alliance. A pleasure to be here today with all of you. So the Wireless Broadband Alliance has been around since 2003, was founded by a group of mobile carriers, mainly to look into the interoperability of Wi-Fi and other wireless technologies. That includes, of course, cellular, satellite, and any other fixed or wireless technology. One of the areas that we have been very active over the last, let's say, 5 years is how Wi-Fi can not only coexist, but as well complement macro cellular networks. And this includes, of course, 4G, 5G, and other wireless technologies for multiple use cases. Because we see a convergence in terms of capabilities from Wi-Fi, so becoming more like a cellular network capable, and that can improve a lot, not only the experience to the end user, but as well for the mobile carriers. They can utilize, they can have one more tool on their toolbox that they can complement either coverage or capacity, and especially in indoor environments or in specific environments that they already have Wi-Fi assets, can be quite interesting to utilize those assets and optimize investments, business cases, and network experience to the consumers. So looking forward for this conversation.
Thanks, Thiago. And there's a really good point there that you mentioned. I was hoping to kick off anyway, sort of talking a bit about the value of this idea of bringing together networks and being able to unify that. The network, I guess, unification, rather than simply, making the services appear seamless over the top. You've mentioned a few benefits to the operator, but I mean, do you see moving forward that there are potential benefits to the end users as well in terms of this unification of different access technologies?
Yeah, I can start, Alex. So definitely, I see a lot of benefits. So, and I can just bring some particular examples. So, all of us as consumers, we have all these cellular services that are available on our phones, but we all have laptops or Wi-Fi tablets that don't have a cellular component from a technology point of view. And many times we don't have on those devices certain type of services that we can have on a cellular device. And just one quick win is to be able for the mobile carriers to use those devices that today are not on the cellular networks and be able to provide that type of cellular-like applications that they want to apply. And a good example that I always like to share is to represent this is the Wi-Fi calling service. The ability for a user to make a phone call, in this case using a cellular phone, that in fact is not attached to a cellular network, but is attached to a Wi-Fi network. And it can use connection manager from the phone, the native connection manager. He can use his agenda of contacts, and he makes a phone call like any other, and is using a different network asset. And that can open up huge benefits in terms of coverage capacity for us as consumers, and even avoid many times the frustration that we have in some locations, especially indoor, where we don't have a cellular network available, and then somehow we need to walk into near the window to make the phone call or the signal to become better, and that can be solved by having this type of converged services, and the ability for the mobile carriers to integrate at their core this type of application and this type of technologies.
Yeah, thanks Thiago. And I mean, Timon, again, it'd be interesting to get a sense, from your side, whether there are commercial drivers and opportunities that you see there, beyond what we covered.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, people have been talking about this for a long time now, and I think you made that point earlier. And I see interest from the operators, and I didn't mention kind of in my intro too, but our board of directors is really all operators as well, and that's what kind of drives our agenda and our thinking. And we've touched on this topic more than once, kind of in our history as well as we think about it. So there are a couple things. I suppose the best example I can think of is that when you have let's say an 8-year-old at home and you want to apply some policy, if you do it in your Wi-Fi router or something, that works pretty fine. But that 8-year-old learns pretty quickly that they can turn off Wi-Fi on their phone and connect to the network over cellular and bypass your profiles and whatnot. And wouldn't it be nice, isn't there a service here where if you have a service profile for a user that it's applied uniformly regardless of how they're connecting to the network? And it's remarkably difficult to do that today if you think about it. And does that make a whole lot of sense? And it may be the same operator, or it may not be the same operator, providing services to the home over both of those communication media. But there's an opportunity here if we can get this figured out. But I think that there are technological challenges, but there are also, I think, huge organizational challenges that have made this hard too on the operator side, because they are effectively different businesses for these operators, the broadband side and the wireless side, and that has definitely made this more difficult. And the world has evolved, and all these things are really solved and addressed with over-the-top applications effectively, and so there is a question about what value and if the value that would be derived warrants the pain of getting there as well too. So it is a pretty difficult lift, but I think still an important space to be pushing on.
Yeah, no, that's really useful. Thank you. And there's something there actually, which, well, I mean, there are a number of issues there, but one that I think is worth talking about is this notion of authentication across these different access media. I mean, Timon, as you point out, having one identity across these different networks is all very well, but also presumably the networks themselves need to be able to authenticate themselves to the device or to whichever supplier is controlling that handover. And I'm just wondering whether there's a case for a new mechanism for authentication, maybe, given that we do now have a proliferation of different kinds of networks between sort of public and private and so on, and devices of different types. Thiago, I know sort of you might have a view on this, given the sort of open roaming.
Yeah, so on that component, the Alliance has been always, I believe since 2009, we have been doing an effort to bring the SIM card type of authentication over Wi-Fi. I know that some carriers all across the world, including US, Asia, Europe, already do it in a very vast way, and somehow that's another example of how different components of the network can be somehow converged. So for me as a user, I'm using a piece of technology that typically are from the mobile core of a network, but I'm using on a completely different environment that is a different technology, and I'm able to be identified on that network, and that network has intelligence to send back to my mobile carrier to be authenticated, and they will say, okay, Wi-Fi, this user on this Wi-Fi network is able to connect. As part of that journey, we have launched a couple of years ago what we call the open roaming standard, that basically is a combination of different pieces of technology that already exist for a few years. And we try to create an environment of federated roaming between networks. And this is coming a lot from the learnings from the mobile data roaming, from GSM technologies or 3GPP technologies, but as well from all the learnings on Wi-Fi side. And our goal is, because the Wi-Fi is a very fragmented industry, so we have all the different types of players. We have large carriers with Wi-Fi hotspots, but we have as well small coffee shops, and we have small, I don't know, independent hotels, shopping malls, all that. So all these gigantic number of players, and to come across a common language between all these different players is very complicated. Because if you are somehow the manager of a shopping mall, you don't understand the language of a mobile carrier or a large telecoms company. So we need to come up with this type of federated roaming. So I don't need to talk with the other members of the federation. I just want to join the federation, and immediately either my identities or my network will be available to others. If I can make one analogy, it's somehow what happens with the Visa card or the MasterCard. So my bank gives me a card, and from that moment on, I can go to all these thousands, not to say millions of terminals of payment, and my card will be recognized. And I've never been there before. So that's the same concept of this type of federated roaming. So I have one identity, can be done by, giving to me by a mobile carrier or by someone else, is on my phone, and from that moment on, that device can be recognized in all these Wi-Fi networks that are part of the federation. And I think this example between cellular and Wi-Fi, in my opinion, is just a small piece of the big iceberg that is hidden, because with the acceleration of private cellular networks and even some private Wi-Fi networks, that will open up a completely new world of partnerships and relationships between the traditional public cellular companies and all these different players, that they can have either private or public networks that are available. And this type of federated roaming approach, it can help a lot to create that easy experience for all of us as consumers, that at the end of the day, I just want to get connected. I don't want to be worried about if I'm on, I don't know, my mobile carrier network, I'm on a free Wi-Fi network, or I'm my office network. I want that my device somehow solves for me, and whenever I'm on that property, the device will connect to what it's defined as the best network available.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad that you touched on the sort of question of private networks. I mean, Timon, I know that the ONF's been doing quite a lot of work here with the model for how to sort of create a software-driven private network. I just can't help but wonder if we're going to be able to have a proliferation of private networks, then there are likely to be very different kinds of, for example, roaming agreements, or prioritization of their internal traffic versus maybe what's coming onto it from other sources. And I just can't help but wonder, how do you see us integrating private networks, I guess, into a sort of seamless set of access opportunities?
Yeah, So yeah, private networks and private 5G is a very exciting area. And if any of the listeners out there haven't heard about it, I mean, this is being projected to be a multi-billion-dollar market and a huge opportunity. This has, been enabled and uncorked through the release of spectrum in various geographies. Like here in the U.S., the CBRS spectrum is made effectively free, and it's happening in countries around the world, in Germany and the like. And this has now made it possible and practical to be able to build, your own private network. I can build one here in my home, but probably more likely, factory floors, building their own 4G, 5G networks to connect their machinery, their robots, their IoT devices. Yes, they can. You can connect handsets and you can connect users, but that's probably not what will be the main driver in this market. Is what we're expecting. What we're expecting is really the Internet of Things movement, which is all about connecting machinery to AI and to the cloud, and being able to then apply that kind of intelligence to automation and the next generation of innovation is likely to be the grand catalyst. And that we're going to have this huge explosion of devices, and they need to be connected in a really reliable way, especially if you're driving around autonomous drones inside your factory, to make sure that they're not colliding or whatnot. It's you need to, it's the level of reliability and determinism has to be much higher than anything we have in Wi-Fi or elsewhere today. So that's the sort of the private 5G movement, and we're quite excited about it. ONF has a software solution in open source called Ether that you can download today, and you can boot it on a laptop, or you can build it into an edge cloud kind of system with running on a Kubernetes based multi-server edge, or you can actually run it in the public cloud with multiple edges, multiple factory floors. All of that is possible with this Ether platform. So that's the background, right? So the next question we get often is that, hey, well, what about Wi-Fi or what about broadband? So I think a lot of the motivation for private 5G is that cellular technologies have tended to just they were designed for larger scale problems than Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi kind of came up from the bottom, and cellular kind of came down from the top. And I know when I go into an airport, my cellular connection works reliably, regardless of how crazy, impact it is, where Wi-Fi is much less deterministic for me. And that's what we see in factory floors and elsewhere, is when you start to have this explosion of devices, suddenly you have contention, and we need a really deterministic, secure, reliable, connectivity, and that, we believe cellular is a really nice foundation for that. But no enterprise is not going to have a Wi-Fi network at the same time, and today different use cases run on the different technologies, and that's all well and good and works pretty well. But there does seem to be a lot of logic behind, is there some kind of unification or harmonization between the technologies that makes some more sense? So, we're definitely interested, open-minded. We'd kind of love to see, some things happen there. We have seen some work, some exploration, some kicking the tires, but a lot of it will come down to what I just mentioned, which is kind of the use case driven model today is effectively a different form of network slicing. You've got a Wi-Fi slice, you have a cellular slice, not just multiple cellular slices. And if it's very natural to attach different use cases to different slices, then and that's kind of where cellular network is going, is slicing the network, not forcing everything into one network. You could also make the argument that it's okay where it's kind of naturally evolving, but coming back to, you talked about authentication and a common authentication database, and I think that's in many ways the low-hanging fruit and makes a lot of sense. And an enterprise wants to be able to manage all of their assets in a more holistic way, and so having kind of a common view, a common database for understanding everything they own, and attaching it to a use case, attaching it to a slice, and being able to monitor its behavior that makes a lot of sense to us, and I think that's probably the first form of convergence we're likely to see.
Okay, no, that's a lot of answer there. Thanks, Tim. And there's a huge amount to sort of take in there. We've been receiving some actually really good questions in the meantime, and I think one question that's come out is just by way of clarification of what we're talking about, in terms of being able to sort of unify access types, and the question is, if there are devices using different radios for cellular, Wi-Fi, they have different spectrum. How should they be combined? Should the devices have multiple radios and be able to access via any available spectrum? And honestly, I have an idea, which is that in some cases this seems to be already happening, or at least there's the technology capacity to do that, so that a device can either choose to use a Wi-Fi or a 5G connection, or both in the case of something with very high capacity. But I think actually it is worth clarifying with both of you, when we're talking about this idea of a unified access piece, then is that the same thing that you're aiming at, or that you understand? And if not, then let's have a bit of a talk about that definition.
Sure.
I mean,
well, if you want me to go first, I agree with you. I think that we've seen this now for over a decade more. That the UEs, the handheld, our cell phones now have Wi-Fi, and we're just used to that. That's all driven by the silicon industry, and the silicon we see coming is definitely headed in this direction as well. It really effectively drops the cost to zero to have different access types built into these devices. And there's certainly a convenience factor for manufacturers to not have different SKUs, different devices for different access types. So I think that all the signs and drivers are that devices will support multiple access types, and it's then up to the sort of the solutions to determine how best to use those, select and use the different access.
Thanks.
Yeah, maybe I can just add a couple of thoughts that, maybe we can open up a discussion further. Of course, the devices will have multiple radios and they will be connecting to multiple technologies. But at the same time, I think we'll open up some challenges that need to be solved about policy management. So as more radio access technologies are available, the device will have, based on the principles that we have today, even more challenges: which network should I connect? And give more option as well. Should be the user to have that option to select whatever he wants, or should be like already happened in some devices where the device will choose for us, or even some technologies that have been tested based on the multipath technologies, like multipath quick from Android, where can use multiple radios at the same time, and somehow create some more complex network architecture, but will allow the devices somehow to consume both radios to bring different data flows and somehow utilize all the assets available. For me, definitely that's the way to go forward, but brings these challenges of the policy management. What is going to happen? How we as users and as well the network owners will be able to manage all those different options, especially when the device has the capability to connect to multiple networks that are available in a precise location. And I have multiple layers of technologies, which one to connect, where to connect, when, and for what type of applications, what type of customer I am, that I can connect to one or the other. So definitely there is a lot of work to be done on that area.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And But actually, Timon, I'd love your thoughts on this, given the ONF's background, for example, in the core network. And I've had conversations with people talking about the need for future networks to be far more automated, far more AI driven. And, the impression that I get in those conversations is that the network should be choosing the most appropriate available resource to be delivering a service, whether that's through, Wi-Fi, 5G, some kind of IoT network or anything else. But at the same time, Thiago makes a really good point. Our devices are used to making some of these selections, and the chances are we'll see applications with their own preferences or requirements as well. So I'd be fascinated to understand sort of your position on this, and whether you see ways to manage what could be very conflicting preferences.
Yeah, so I think Thiago actually touched on it. So in this view that I painted of Industry 4.0 and all the robots in a Tesla factory being connected and cooperating with drones as they're kind of doing things, you don't want these devices picking how they're connected to the network. There needs to be kind of an overarching policy and policy management, and this view of taking all the drones and putting them in their own slice, or even you've got high priority, low priority drones, and giving them kind of their own sandbox in which they can cooperate without interference. And it's really not, I think, the drones picking what slice they're connected to. It's some probably operator human policy setup that is taking place, that is kind of understanding the inventory of drones, and that they're kind of cooperating. It's kind of architecting the factory floor. And today it is true that we select the network ourselves based on our own device, but that's because we're the source of intelligence, and we're kind of making the picks. But I think that it shifts as the problem scales, 10x, 100x, 1000x, and the way we manage it. And it's not humans that are the connecting elements, but it's more machines and devices and applications. And I do think that it's really, it's a policy, authentication, orchestration problem space, and that's where we're going to solve the problem and bring the greatest value.
Okay, I'd like to. We've spoken a good deal at the moment about the mobile and the Wi-Fi element. I'd like to sort of ask whether we should be integrating fixed broadband into that mixture. We have a question asking whether fiber to the home solves everything, which I don't know, but do we need to be bringing fixed broadband into the mix when we're talking about this unified landscape? And Timon, I understand that the ONF is starting to work a little to address the broadband network. So perhaps we can start with what's happening there and build from that.
Yeah, actually, I think it's a really important point and good point. Thank you for bringing it up. So yeah, I mean, ONF is not just starting, but ONF has had tremendous success on the broadband side. And for those of you and your listeners who don't know, ONF has a project called Volta and SIBA in the open broadband space. It has done, as I described earlier, broken the PON network into pieces. They were historically, vertically integrated chassis systems, very complicated, high margin systems. And if you buy PON, you buy from one vendor and it locks you into using that vendor and their devices in the home and whatnot, right? And so ONF and its community have created a solution and that is now in production at tier 1, in many of the major continents around the world now, and really growing even into Latin America and elsewhere. And I can mention, in your neck of woods, Deutsche Telekom is deploying in production. I was just in Turkey last week, where a number of this community were meeting. Turk Telecom is deploying in production. Geo is deploying in India. So it's really remarkable. These are huge operators, and doing really full scale kinds of things, right? So that's the backdrop, and that's that's moving, and and really 5G has been getting all the hype over the last 3+ years, but broadband is winning a lot of the deals. If you really look under the hood, there's a ton of broadband that's taking place, kind of kicked off by the pandemic. Governments are investing in fiber to the home, fiber to the X. You look at the financial numbers that are getting delivered by some of the operators lately, and you see where kind of there's some sweet spots. There's something going on here that shouldn't be overlooked. So that's the backstory. So the next is convergence of wireless and broadband, and absolutely I think there's some low-hanging fruit. There's some immediate low-hanging fruit for ONF, in that we have this broadband portfolio of PON, and PON is really, especially the higher speed PON that's coming out, is really ideal in many ways for mobile backhaul when you're going to build out your infrastructure, because it makes it easier and much more fiber efficient to connect dense set of radios out there. And so we are already beginning to look at kind of melding our wireless portfolio and our broadband portfolio, and that broadband can serve as backhaul, and they can sort of seamlessly work together, and certainly complement each other in that way. So that there's a form of, I don't think that's what most people mean by convergence, but we see it in a convergence in our portfolio at the very least. But then I did mention, that kind of that use case, that security profile use case for end users in the home who are connected over either broadband over Wi-Fi, and that again a lot of interest and value in being able to manage that portfolio of users and homes in a much more uniform way. Today, the best that operators can do really is uniform billing, to get one bill, paper bill, or now maybe an e-bill to a household, but nothing beyond that. And it's kind of remarkable. But I don't underestimate the challenge, because these are huge organizations, and the broadband and the wireless side are effectively different companies inside these huge companies, and it is a difficult challenge to really unify their service offerings.
Yeah, thanks. Tiago, I mean, with the WBA, I mean, I think a lot of people, certainly within the mobile world, would instinctively think that, when it started, Wi-Fi was kind of the fixed world's answer to mobile telephony, and maybe we've moved past this idea of it there being a case of one or the other will eat the world. But with that kind of a background, do you see, I don't know, sort of fixed broadband integration being much of a question, or is it more, as sort of Timo mentions, that it's about making sure that whatever is behind the access point is unified?
Yeah, Timon shared a lot of thoughts that I agree with, and answering to your question, Alex. Yeah, from WBA side, we see the benefit of the convergence of the fixed access and the macro cellular network. Special position from a last mile, opposite somehow Timon talked about the backend system as a last mile. Definitely there is a lot going on, and Wi-Fi over the last 5 years has improved a lot in terms of flexibility on the equipments with all these mesh type of solutions, initiatives like Open Wi-Fi from the telecom infra project that we collaborate with them, where we can disaggregate the hardware from the software, making much more flexible for large tier 1 carriers to deploy more advanced solutions. We see a lot of evolution as well on identity management. And for example, passpoint technology or even open roaming can be part of that. And then we have all this evolution of the standards for Wi-Fi 6E, where, for example, in US, additional spectrum is available on the 6 gigahertz band that somehow will allow even lower latency, faster speeds, and more than that, a better management of all the devices that we have at the home. And like Timon said, the pandemic somehow wake up everyone for the need of having a better broadband in all our houses. Somehow it's the extension of our offices. And that definitely open up, in my view, the opportunity for the fixed broadband carriers to pay more attention, how they can integrate services, especially those ones that have mobile services as well, how to integrate fixed services with the mobile services and somehow make it an extension of the company. I've been having conversation with many of our members, special tier 1 carriers, that they are very keen to explore advanced services. How can I apply the policies that I have in my enterprise into my home? How can I have a direct access to all the systems that I have in my company in a secure way? And how can I use the identity that I have in my office and I can be recognized? I can use it in my home, and suddenly I can have a traffic prioritization in my house every time that I'm using that type of identity or device in my house. So this is opening a lot of discussion within the tier 1 carriers, mainly, how to explore those opportunities. But I see that conversion, happening. It could go faster, but definitely there is a wake up right now from the tier 1 carriers.
Yeah. Thanks. Can I to extend upon that point? I had a question in which has pointed out that the in 3GPP release 16 and some of the releases from the Broadband Forum, their specifications support wireless and wireline convergence. Essentially, fixed and mobile services all being run on a converged 5G core. And the question is really, is that the right kind of basis, or are there additional issues and gaps that those standards need to cover? I mean, Tiago, you mentioned, for example, this sort of issue around identity and authentication, but working out where the gaps are, I think is really interesting. I welcome both your thoughts really on if there are important issues that haven't yet been addressed beyond those standards.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Diego.
No, I was just going to raise or reinforce one topic that I shared before, that is the policy management. Definitely, there is some work on 3GPP, especially with the ATSS type of technologies, somehow to run policies across access radio technologies. But if there is one area that definitely I believe it needs further work is on that policy management. I don't know if you agree, Timon, but definitely for at least on our discussions in WBA has been an area of a lot of dialogues within the members.
Well, we were seeing, so there's some activity that I'm aware of around something called an access gateway function. And there's sort of a collaboration between the Broadband Forum and 3GPP. And it's, sort of looking at the, as I think of it, how to bring broadband users and traffic onto the 5G core, and as you described, and also looking at sort of a converged user plane. So you have this, in the mobile world, you have the UPF, the user plane function. It's the user plane low level packet forwarder, and in the broadband space, you have the BNG, the broadband gateway that does authentication, and then also the forwarding. And so there's an effort and an interest in Well, number one, on the mobile side, there's already cup separation of control and user plane, and the UPF is the user plane piece. On the broadband side, there isn't that clean separation. So there's some work to, first of all, do that clean separation on the broadband side, and I think that's important and interesting work. Then there's also some work to be able to do a converged user plane of the lower half, to be able to have sort of one forwarding element that can handle both broadband and mobile traffic. And then thirdly, there's work in here to basically have, kind of the broadband piece of it be able to connect into the mobile core for the authentication and policy and all of those kinds of things. So that's how, I see the clay being kind of molded, or at least attempts at starting to kind of outline how the pieces come together. We think there's a lot of interesting potential and possibility in here. These are in many ways the underlying building blocks that make possible some of the higher level things we've been talking about already, about one of the motivators, or even the politics inside the operators of how these things are built and whatnot too, right? But from a technology point of view, this whole movement is very exciting to us. We're technologists at ONF. We come to things, that's our history and legacy. And the separation of cup separation is right up our alley. That is SDN. And that's what we've been doing all along. So we are, and we've implemented, that user plane function very low level in something called the P4 programming language. So it can run, at terabit speeds down in silicon, and very, very cost-effective kind of model. We've also done prototyping of that in the BNG space. We're looking at melding that together and creating a uniform user plane element that can run, distributed out at the edge of the network, very close to devices, in a very cost-effective way, all from a centralized control that could well be the next generation of 5G core control. I think it's very interesting with my technology hat on, and something that we are actually beginning to explore and pursue. And we've done some different, early prototypes of components of this. I think we will continue to push there, but that's going to, the use cases and business drivers have to kind of come together for this. As we go forward as well.
Yeah, there's actually a good question there that you bring up, and that's to do with, I guess, where we should be looking to control a lot of this access management. Whether you see that as a function that could be sort of distributed as much as possible towards the end user, so that, for example, when we look at the sort of closest point to the end user that does have this converged management between Wi-Fi, mobile, and potentially the broadband as well. Is there a sensible place that we could be distributing these kinds of control functions to, so that we can give users, let's say, the best available service, and manage those policies at that point, rather than necessarily going all the way back to the core?
Well, we were talking about private networks earlier, and so in our view, the policy for private networks is really run by the enterprise, and it's much more of something like Active Directory or LDAP, or their kind of their policy database for their users and devices, and less of what we think about in a mobile operator. Underlying that is a core. I mean, our private network solution has a core. It has all the 3GPP kind of components and all of that, but it feels different when it's kind of packaged for enterprise than when it's packaged for operator scale deployment. But I'm sure that operators would come at it kind of in a different way as well, and more likely to think about it as a centralized authentication database and running policy in that way. And there's no right or wrong answer here. I think that there are use cases for both, for sure, and there's also crossover scenarios where large operators are going to be running private networks, and there's going to be roaming from private networks to public networks, and so we're going to see a combination of the two, I believe.
Yeah. Thiago, I saw you nodding there. I didn't know if you
No,
have.
yeah, I can just add just a short sentence. Definitely, I agree with Timon, and I think it depends a lot from use case to use case, and I think that's the component of mobility. When we are in the presence of the need of mobility between different sites, that's where somehow that centralized component becomes somehow more relevant, while we have even today on, I don't know, private network like Timon said, or even a Wi-Fi network is one site, one location, so it's managed more on a local site.
Yeah, thanks. There's I guess you must hear this a lot, but you know, we've been talking about software-defined networks in a sort of very thorough way. Been talking about 5G, Wi-Fi 6, all this kind of thing. But to what extent, you know, if we're able to crack this question of providing a unified access, do you think we'll be able to make it backward compatible, for example, with 4G, let's say? I mean, is that at all reasonable, or are we looking very much at you know, the sort of access networks of the future in our conversations?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's not so much a technology question. It's more kind of a, you know, a business driver question, an ROI question. You know, our solution, you know, our private 5G solution is both a 4G, 5G solution, kind of a unified core. We support radios in both genres. You can mix and match, and so it kind of would come as a natural extension, you know, as we kind of build on the foundation of our work. But it's going to really depend on how it's getting deployed and who's deploying it, and the use case, and whether this is a retrofit over a 4G network, or if it's a new 5G private network getting deployed, or whatnot. I don't think the technology, there's much of a technology challenge here, so much as just kind of figuring out how it's getting deployed and what the use case is that will determine whether 4G is included in this or not.
That's fair enough. And I mean, Thiago, from the WBA standpoint, you know, would you say that the work that you've been doing is really sort of future focused, or, you know, are you hopeful that if you can crack it in, you know, the latest versions of the technology, then you'll be able to work backwards and make it sort of more broadly available?
Yeah, so I can share that traditionally Wi-Fi has been a backward compatibility technology. So even today I can pick up the most recent Wi-Fi 6E AP that I can buy in the market, and I can bring a laptop from 10 years ago with Wi-Fi 3 or Wi-Fi 4 standard, and it's going to work. And I agree a lot with Timon on this as well, because we work with many different enterprise companies and carriers, and especially on the enterprise side, it's a lot related with use case. And I can give an example. We had a large manufacturing company in UK that they wanted to enter on this fully digitalization of their manufacturing plant. Mainly for maintenance, that was their main goal. But they are from a very traditional type of industry, and the type of machines that they have a lifetime of over 30 years. And they are machines that they have more than 30 tons of weight. So it's the type of machines that you buy it once and it's going to last for 40, 30, maybe 50 years. And in those type of use cases, you need to understand, okay, what is the best technology that I can invest that somehow will align with the lifetime of my devices and my use case specifically. And I think that is very relevant. And the only thing that I can share that I think is, I'm very optimistic, is all those companies will have more options on their toolbox. So depending on that use case, then okay, maybe I go private cellular because I want to have whatever determinism and super low latency for whatever, like Timon was saying that I want the drones, yeah, not to clash between themselves and all that. Or it can be someone that somehow, okay, maybe I'm good enough with the 5G slice that I get from my, I don't know, carrier that is around, or I can even want to go with my Wi-Fi network because I know the type of sensors are cheaper, or I need to compete by price, and somehow Wi-Fi can provide a better solution. So I think having more options on the toolbox is very positive, and the backward compatibility is going to depend a lot on the use case.
No, that's fair enough. Thank you. That's I think very clear from the pair of you there on that one. So we're getting close to time, and speaking of that, I'd like to maybe ask you both to peer into your crystal balls at this point, and share some timelines about the sort of projects that you're working on. We've already sort of addressed some of the questions that you think are still open in terms of, you know, making sure that on the broadband side, for example, there's the control and user plane separation, or in terms of the policy management. So it'd be great just to understand from your perspective, you know, what kind of time frame we're looking at, do you think, before we're able to really put out a sort of unified access solution, even if it's not widely distributed at that point. I mean, Timon, perhaps I can ask you to sort of start with some of your thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say that I'm pretty bullish that even in just in a 1-year timeline, we're going to have some kind of interesting progress on the technology front, and being able to demonstrate and show, you know, some points of value. But then, you know, from there to deployment is the next step, and that depends a lot. You know, I think things will be a lot faster in the private network space, where there's it's effectively greenfield. Yeah. And I think it'll be a lot longer in the public network space. You know, if you know, it's not abnormal for things to really take, you know, a couple of years, you know, 3 years, 5 years to really impact the public networks. They're so huge, you know, but you know, still there's progress every year, and, you know, pushing things forward, and then it turns into kind of this huge tidal wave of transformation. And that's what ONF is good at, is kind of seeding those tidal waves. And, you know, I think we're going to see some interesting seeds over the next year, and then more to come.
Brilliant, thanks. And Thiago, from
I want to be more optimistic than Timon. I think we are doing already very good first steps is starting to come on board. In WBA, we are very optimistic about open roaming. So open roaming, we can look at as one initial step to bring that convergence between cellular networks, regardless if it's a micro cellular network or even a private cellular network. But every time that there is a mobility component, the roaming between networks becomes in place. And we are very enthusiastic about this concept of federated roaming across use cases, across identities, and across technologies.
Great, thank you. Now, I mean, we do have loads more questions, and far more than I think we have time for, realistically. So for those of you that we haven't managed to address, I'm going to try and follow up with you afterwards. But you know, with that, I think we're pretty much up to time. So it just remains for me to thank Thiago and Timon, as well as you in the audience, for all of your inputs. And just remember, we'll be putting this recording on 6G World early next week, if you need a refresher. And then next month, we'll be exploring the world of time-sensitive networking. So I'll look forward to catching up with you all for that. For now, though, Timon, Thiago, thank you ever so much. And goodbye to you all out there.